Nightcast. Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth brings you the current news from the world today and how it relates to Bible prophecy. Understanding the end-time events leading to the peaceful world tomorrow. Ladies and gentlemen, Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth.
Well, greetings. Excuse me. Greetings, friends, and welcome to this February 16th, 2014 edition of Nightcast. As you can see, I'm still trying to get my tie on here, friends. And, all right. I wanted to get on because those of you that have to keep recycling your mobile phone until we get on live, I'm sorry we are a little bit late tonight. It's just been one of those days. Usually you've been seeing me get on right on time with this, and all right, we're ready to go. February 16th it is tonight. We're looking, friends, at weather. Again, we're seeing weather report after weather report that is saying we're having the worst winter records on record, or the worst winter weather on record. Story after story. And those of you who have been following the prophecies of God that have been given by Mr. Herbert W. Armstrong, you know, some people say, oh, well, it looked like Mr. Armstrong was saying things were coming together back when he was alive. And a lot of what you saw, let me just pull that forward so you can see these waves in the background. I'll tell you what they are in a moment, what they relate to. But I'll just play that behind me. But people used to say, well, Mr. Armstrong thought things were coming together. You know, what he was watching was the EU starting to shape together. We didn't have back then reports of record-breaking, being the worst. Some of these stories tonight you're going to see, my friends, these are some of the worst on record. And that's what leads up to, let's go ahead and hit this. I'm doing the program a little differently tonight. I'll explain a couple reasons why in a moment, but you'll see on this chart, we're watching for especially these four seals, these first four of the six seals of Revelation 6. Revelation 6 describes 6 of the 7 seals, and the first 4 of those seals have been operating more or less one way or another since the time of Jesus Christ when he was here on earth. But what he told us to do was to watch for when the activities that he described in plain language to the gospel writers, when those activities accelerated more and more and became more and more prominent, such that the trouble he mentioned that would be part of the 4th seal would escalate to mega trouble that then becomes the 5th seal, all in and of itself, the Great Tribulation, a time of Jacob's trouble, a time of trouble so ferocious, so bad, that no time before it will have ever been so bad, and thankfully no time after it again will ever be as bad. And so we're watching for these things, and things are escalating. Friends, if you don't see it, they are escalating to this point. Now, as a brother I talked to today said, well, Steve, it could still go on for a few more years. Could. It also could shake around even this year. So don't rest on your laurels thinking, I got all kind of time, just do whatever I want. Perhaps you don't. Perhaps it's a time for some real earnest fasting and prayer to make sure that you are close to God, and that not only you, not just for yourself, but that as you see these world events. I've got some stories tonight, friends, that after I bore you with a little bit of talk here, when I show you some of these stories, they should help each of us get on our knees and be crying out to God, oh God, Thy kingdom come. One of these stories tonight is a heart-wrencher. And like one of my friends who, I didn't know that well because even though he was in college at the time I was, he was on the Big Sandy campus while I was on the Pasadena campus. And he called me up one day, or sent me an email one day, and said to me, Steve, you know, I watch you once in a while. He says, but I don't like watching news today. I don't like all them bad stories. Well, you know, friends, that's what news basically is bad stories today. And if we don't watch them, how are you going to follow the instruction Christ gave us in the model prayer to pray that part of the prayer? thy kingdom come. How are you going to have any teeth in that prayer if you're not watching what's going on so that there's meaning behind? They're not just words. Oh, God, let's see, hallowed be your name, and your will be done on earth as it is in heaven, and thy kingdom come. He doesn't want to hear that. He wants to hear you describing some event you just watched that says, oh, God, that makes me sick to think that these people are doing what they're doing in Boko Haram to people, going around house to house, shooting the people. And first of all, they're slitting the throats, letting them bleed to death right there, dragging them out on the streets to finish them off, showing the whole neighborhood somebody dying and bleeding, showing those who are able to come back later who weren't there at the time, because anybody in the neighborhood, they were going house to house today, slitting throats, and if they couldn't get close enough to slit the throat, they just shot them. And they killed everybody in that neighborhood. Now, unfortunately, I wasn't able to, today was such a day, I wasn't able to get video on that one, but maybe that's a good thing. Maybe you don't want to see that. Just hear about it for now and get your gut prepared for tomorrow when I can dig up some video on this and show you behind Boko Haram in-village massacre. And some of you watch these news stories sometimes. Some of us, friends, some of us maybe watch these news stories and just, there's some professional BBC wonderful announcer announcing it in a very professional way and showing scene after scene, and we see so much of this sometimes we become kind of blasé to it. And so maybe it's better on this one story, I'm just kind of telling you a little bit about it tonight. Could you relate to it more, friends, if you could envision this story from Boko Haram today, envision it being your street, your town, your city. Well, let's narrow it right down to your street and the streets around you. Let's say you just happened to be out back and you saw these terrorists coming dressed in military uniforms, and you were able to jump in a bush or climb a tree or whatever and hide and see what's going on, and they go from one house to another, including your house, and they slit everybody's throat or shoot them, drag them in the streets. They kill everybody on your street. Now envision that, if you will. Just see it as your street. People, if you've lived in that neighborhood for a long time, people you grew up next to, you've known for years and years, you're seeing them all of a sudden in one afternoon, seeing them all be brutally killed, the rest of their lives snuffed out in one afternoon. Your town, your city, your street, your house, and the houses next door to you and across the street and down your street. Every single house, they don't miss a one. And also we watch these stories and we say, well, that's somewhere overseas, somewhere where they got all those bad people. Couldn't happen here. Oh, couldn't happen here. The President of the United States is now lampooning a country that was passing some laws that would make it a crime to commit a homosexual act. And guess what the President of the United States is saying in disrespect of that, in disregard of that? He's lampooning those people. I'm going to have more on that for you in just a little bit. I don't want to hit you with all the bad stuff myself. You'll think I'm a horrible person for giving you all that bad news. I'm going to let the BBC correspondent people give you some of the next bad news. In this first story I was just showing you here, this footage that I just played, maybe I could back it up and just roll it again while I just tell you this about it. This is footage taken from a cruise ship. And let's go ahead and pull it forward and I'll tell you what you're seeing here. This footage has emerged from a cruise ship being rocked by a severe storm around 45 minutes before a passenger on board was killed. James Swinstead, 85 years old, of Colchester, Essex, England, died when a huge wave crashed into the British vessel Marco Polo. This happening just a few days ago on Friday, just the day before yesterday. His widow praised the crew but criticized the vessel as badly maintained. Of course, they're out there in some pretty bad weather. Operator Cruise and Maritime Voyages CMV said the ship was fully compliant with strict maritime regulation. But friends, as you could see, we're having storms and weather that's the worst ever on record now. Even right here in the United States, we're having the second major snowstorm in, we're having major storms, more than the second major snowstorm in a week here in the U.S., but in Tokyo, this one's going to relate to Tokyo. Tokyo has, actually, I'm going to have that video for you in just a little bit, but in the form of some still pictures. And friends, I'll admit today things worked out. I didn't have as much preparation time as usual, so I'll just explain that, and that'll be my excuse on some of this. But I do have some good video for you, so wrestle here with me. And those of you who watch live, I really appreciate you, because as you see me perhaps have a problem with this or that, you're able, if you will, to pray, hey, God, help Steve out. I can see he's having a little struggle with something. But I wanted to tell you this later in the program. Just before we go, I'll tell you about Tokyo warning of severe snowstorms for the first time in more than a decade, and they're also having the second major snowstorm in a single week. And that's happening over there, while other places around the world, there are the worst weather on record right now. But in Tokyo, at least 11 people have been killed by a record-breaking snowstorm, according to local media. Hundreds of people have been evacuated from their homes, and hundreds more injured, as more than 1 meter, that's about 3 feet, of snow fell in some areas. The snow forced airports to cancel flights and caused roads as it barreled past, and closed roads as it barreled past Tokyo yesterday. Forecasters are warning of blizzards and avalanches later as the storm moves north. Kyoto News Agency reported deaths in several prefectures near Tokyo, and other deaths as far south as a couple of islands there that I really can't pronounce. Reports said roofs of buildings had collapsed under the weight of snow in some areas, and hundreds of drivers had been left stranded in miles-long traffic jams. Some 27 centimeters of snow was dumped on Tokyo Friday and Saturday, and several other cities reported record snowfall. Friends, are you getting this in these reports? Don't let it slip by you. We're talking about record-breaking snowfall. I mean, this is the time of the end Mr. Armstrong told us to be watching for. And some of your news reports may not be punching this out for you, but we started this program as the result of one brother in Alabama coming in and complaining to the minister I was working with at the time, Mr. Robert Collins, and saying, you guys aren't watching the news, and many of our brethren, Mr. Collins, are not watching the news. And after this brethren came over and chewed us out for that, we talked and we said, that's true. We're not watching it every day. We're paying attention to his health and this and that and the other thing, and really not watching. We're just hoping health situation gets better here. So we said, okay, let's start watching that. And we started spending the day diving through news, and we started seeing things pretty interesting. A lot of them, though, on the back pages. You had to really dig for them. And we already had a video live stream going, and so we talked and said, Mr. Collins, like I do for you on the Sabbath, I could, if you want to announce these things, I could see if we could get a license to show them. And having worked in television, I knew how to contact and arrange contracts and licenses, so I made contact with the BBC, and we got a little contract for being licensed to show their daily film video clips. And there's certain things we have to do. And so we started that program. And shortly before Mr. Collins died, he encouraged me to keep this going. I tried for 6 months to find somebody else to take the seat because I had a lot of duties behind the camera and running things to set it up, and I would have been happy if somebody else would have done what he did and do the lip flapping here in front of you. And I asked person after person, minister after minister, and nobody wanted to come forward and do it. So after a lot of prayer, a lot of fasting, it came to me that, okay, you need to take this in the interim. Tonight's my 320th program, friends, and I've been doing it, as many of you see, faithfully, every night, Sunday through Thursday. Pretty much as far as I can recall, we've done that without fail since I've started. Of course, we took a break. We didn't even take a break feast time. I kept this going during the feast. But more on that, what's happening on the weather in Tokyo, and I know I'm talking a whole lot more than usual tonight. I'll play some video in a moment. I got some really good clips to show you. Homeless people are particularly vulnerable in Japan as temperatures plummeted below zero. The roof of an aircraft hangar collapsed under heavy snow, having a tail fin poking through. And again, it's the second major snowstorm to batter Japan in a week. Last week, Tokyo residents were warned of a severe snowstorm for the first time in more than a decade. 11 people were also killed in that storm, with more than 1,000 people injured nationwide in Japan. Now, bringing it home to for those in the United States, drought and snow, extreme U.S. weather from coast to coast today in the U.S.
Snowstorms like this are rare in the southern states, but drivers in North Carolina struggled on roads encased in ice. Many abandoned their cars altogether and walked to shelter, returning to reclaim them from the ice later. The storm battered the northeast too, burying cities like New York in over 30 centimetres of snow and leaving more than 1 million homes without power along the east coast. The extreme conditions have been blamed for at least 25 deaths, mostly in traffic accidents. At least 30 people were injured in this pile-up in Pennsylvania, the icy roads treacherous after the storm.
I looked in my rearview mirror, I saw him, and I thought I was done. I thought I was done. The entire back end of my car is gone.
President Obama left a very White House behind and arrived on the much warmer west coast, where California has had the lowest rainfall since records began more than a century ago. These fields are usually bountiful. The state produces half the country's fruit and vegetables, but this year, swathes of central California will be fallow.
We have to be clear. A change in climate means that weather-related disasters like droughts, wildfires, storms, floods are potentially going to be costlier and they're going to be harsher.
President Obama has promised government money to help Californian farmers and, more controversially, will ask Congress next month to spend $1 billion on a climate resilience fund. Beth McLeod, BBC News, Washington.
Friends, one of the things our government leaders don't tell us, Ken, no, by the way, I apologized if I'm popping your ears now because you had to turn your volume up because I had my volume low at the beginning. So if you want to back your volume down, I had the volume knob too low on the mic. I apologize about that. I think we got it set correctly now. So maybe back down your speakers a little bit so I'm not blasting your speakers out. But friends, you know, this chart, let me put this chart back up here for a moment. Look at seal number 4. It's numbered number 4. We got the green color behind it. We say pale. That relates to how Revelation describes or depicts the fourth seal. It depicts it as a pale horse with a rider of that horse named Death, alongside whom the rider and the horse rides Hades, hell, the grave. And Jesus Christ described the activities of this horse and its rider named Death in 3 Greek terms that the gospel writers Matthew, Mark, and Luke wrote up. They wrote them up as loimus, meaning disease epidemics, pestilence, the plagues of Egypt. They wrote them up as seismus, meaning seismic activity, commotions in the air, such as gale force winds of all kinds, including hurricanes, tornadoes, typhoons, tsunamis, wildfires, floods, whatever else can occur up in the air, and commotions on the ground, such as earthquakes and volcanic eruptions. They start on the ground from inside the ground and erupt up into the sky and blow ashes and smoke up into the air. And tsunamis start on the ground, but they rise high into the air. All kind of commotions on the ground. All these things are part of the seismus that Jesus Christ described as part of this fourth seal. Now, I know Mr. Armstrong only emphasized the disease epidemics. A lot of us locked into the disease epidemics, but Jesus Christ described, and Mr. Armstrong said, listen to your ministers for the small branches and the twigs. He said, I'm giving you the major branches. The major branch would have been the disease epidemics, but as we get closer and closer to the end, Jesus Christ said the earthquakes would increase and be all over the place. And that word he used for earthquakes, seismus, is the word he used. It doesn't only mean earthquakes. It's not limited to earthquakes. Pull out your English Greek lexicons, those of you who study God's Word, and you'll see the Greek word that Jesus Christ used there that the King James Version renders only as earthquakes. It's more than earthquakes. The Greek English lexicons will tell you it is commotions in the air, such as gale force winds, blah, 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 and commotions on the ground, such as, and it gives the example of earthquakes, but that's only one example of commotions on the ground. Volcanic eruptions are commotions on the ground. So are floods and wildfires and etc. And let's go back to the chart. Another term that Jesus Christ used for this pale horse, the fourth seal of Revelation, it was loimus, which Mark wrote up in Mark 13, verse 8. Look it up in your own Bibles and look up that Greek word for tarake. I meant to say, I'm sorry, but I already covered loimus. It is tarake. Mark 13:8, he uses the word T-A-R-A-C-H-E. Tarake, however you pronounce that in Greek. Look it up in your English Greek lexicon. It means troubled waters, and it means it both literally and figuratively. In the literal sense, that could be part of your floods. In the figurative sense, it could just mean trouble that we have, but not the mega trouble, not the great tribulation trouble. And it means mobs and seditions, which are in a lot of news, which we also kind of categorize under the red horse for war and rumors of war, when you have civil war-like activity within a country, and sometimes it's only mobs and seditions. These two seals, they relate together. But the activities that Jesus Christ described for this fourth seal, they are becoming much more, what's the word I want to use? I can't think of it and say it tonight. Prolificate, much more rampant, many more of them. And when they do like that, that heads us very close to the fifth seal. Friends, I hope you're seeing that, and because I can see the clock now, we were a few minutes late tonight. I apologize for that. We try to be on time to make it easy for you to sync up your mobile phones, because I know you have to recycle until you get the live signal. If you watch on a PC, just have the web page open. When we come on the air, boom, it opens up, no problem. But if you're on a mobile device, or particularly Android, I think it may be the same way on an iPhone as well, you've got to cycle on after we've hit the on the air button. We're working with our streaming provider to try to remedy that. Now, let's go to a few more stories, and I want to explain. Friends, some of you who watch regularly know that on Sunday night, since we're off on Friday night and Saturday night, sometimes we go a little longer than a half hour, sometimes as much as an hour, because of news happening on the days we're not on, those couple of days, plus today. So sometimes we have to go a little longer on Sunday night. So I just explained that to you. We may do that. We're going to do that tonight. I got some video I don't want you to miss. I hope you'll stay with me, and I'll try to shorten up my introductions and not belabor them too much and bore you too bad. in this next story, I want you to notice how fruits and vegetables are affected by this story that relates to a week of extreme weather in the United States. The East Coast was hit by a huge snowstorm which affected 100 million Americans in more than 20 states. On the West Coast, California continues to experience its worst drought in... Friends, are you listening? Please tune up your ears on this. I hope you didn't turn down your speaker too much a moment ago. Listen to this. A few months ago, we were saying California was having its worst drought in over 50 years since 1956. That has changed, my friends. California is now experiencing its worst drought in living memory. Duh. Mr. Armstrong told us when things started becoming the worst ever, that is the lead-in to the fifth seal, the Great Tribulation. It's happening in front of our noses, dear friends, and I have the opportunity for the 36 of you that average watch this program to be able to help you perhaps see that. God's been building this little program little by little. We started out with 2 or 3 viewers. God built it up to 3 or 4, up to 5 or 6, up to 7 or 8, 8, 9, 10, 11. Then next thing you know, after several months, a couple dozen. Now our average has been, with our host provider telling us, around 3 dozen. Little by little, we get a new viewer or 2 every week. And we've asked God from the very outset and beginning, and I still fast and pray and ask God to either build it, you build it, so the weary builder's not toiling in vain, or close the door, dear Father. And even though it's little by little, slow, like a snail, it's building, not the other way. And I've been very thankful for that, because those of you who may have watched me in the beginning, you saw me really do a horribly boring job of hosting this thing. And hopefully I hear from some of you, thank you for letting me know I'm making I make little improvements as we go. And tonight's my 320th program. I'm starting to enjoy doing this. So I would love to have some help with it. Yes, instead of one-horsing this thing, I'd love to have somebody help me with all this. But it's okay. I do it. I'm loving doing this part of it now. And I'll try not to get too big-headed about that and bore you too much. So let's go to this report. I was just reading about this being the worst drought in living memory in California, with a report by Beth McLeod from Washington. Well, Beth, come on. Where are you there? Oh, I forgot to hit this button over here. Beth McLeod reports from Washington.
The storms in Britain never seem to end, while America has experienced bitterly cold conditions.
All right, my apologies to Beth McLeod, and let me just take a peek at what this is supposed to be. Why is the U.S. gripped by severe weather? I mean, that voice obviously was not Beth McLeod. Coldest in record, wouldn't it? Friends, I've lost track of my order. I'm just going to play this for you. We'll figure it out after you see this.
Chicago is used to freezing winters, but data taken from this weather station shows that it's been one of the coldest on record, and the same is true across many other parts of the United States. So the big question is whether this can be explained by natural variability, or whether something has gone wrong with our weather. Some scientists are worried that the recent warming in the Arctic has shifted the main system that drives weather patterns in Northern Europe and North America. A current of fast-flowing air, in red and green, called the jet stream. This year it's dipped down lower than usual, which has meant weather has stayed the same for weeks on end, keeping the cold weather in North America and the storms over Britain. At a science meeting in Chicago, Jennifer Francis has presented new evidence that in recent years these dips have been deeper and they've been happening more often.
I think we can expect more of the same, and I think we should expect it to occur more frequently it being these very wavy patterns in the jet stream that tend to result in weather conditions being very persistent in one place, and so it seems like your weather is kind of stuck for a long time. I do think that's going to happen more often in the future.
It's too soon to tell whether this shift in the jet stream is permanent or whether it's a direct result of man-made climate change. But the new research does suggest we may have to get used to winters where spells of weather go on for weeks or even months. Prahlad Ghosh, BBC News, Chicago.
Okay, friends, I hope I had my mic on a moment ago. I noticed the switch was still on, but I know what happened. I planned to just tease you about this story and play it at the end, but I'm really glad we went ahead and played it now while I was emphasizing the point about having the coldest weather on record occurring. And in the second half now of for those of you that can stay with me, if some of you have only prepared to stay with us for a half hour tonight, I got that story in for you during the first half hour. I hope you'll be able to stay because the next stories relate to something important that could relate to how the EU shapes around. This story very much, we've been playing this we had stories on it last week, and then we had stories on it in some of the months previous to that. But the question here in this story is, would an independent Scotland stay in the EU?
The question seems simple. Would an independent Scotland be a member of the European Union? But the answer has never been clear, and today came a warning.
It's a new country, and so I believe it's going to be extremely difficult, if not impossible, a new member state coming out of one of our countries, and getting the agreement of the other. But having said that, is now for the British people and the Scottish people, of course, in their referendum to decide about their future.
If Scotland has to apply to join the 27-country club, it would need the approval of all its members, and convincing Spain might be tricky. Catalan separatists are fighting for independence, and Spain would be wary of setting a precedent which may make it easier for Catalonia to break away from Madrid. Opponents of Scottish independence say that's just one reason why negotiations wouldn't be easy.
Even when the European Union has been absolutely united in admitting new members, it takes an inordinately long time to agree everything. Here you would not have that. This is the first time a country would be breaking away from an existing member state, then applying to get back in again.
But the Scottish Government says an independent Scotland would not be a new state. And despite what Mr Barroso says, there would be no need to reapply to the EU.
I think his remarks really don't represent the reality, given the fact that not a single member state of the European Union has in any way suggested that they would veto Scotland's membership of the European Union.
There's no precedent to this process. No country has ever had to apply for membership of the EU after already having been part of the club. So if there's a yes vote, it will be followed by months of negotiations.
The Yes campaign says voters who feel bullied by Westminster are being pushed their way. Scots, they say, don't like being told what they can or cannot do. The Better Together campaign says the last week has shown Alex Salmond is a man without a plan. It feels as if this referendum debate has stepped up a gear as both sides campaign for every vote. Laura Bicker, BBC News, Edinburgh.
Thank you, Laura. Friends, the main point of that story, I hope you got it, was the President of the European Commission, Jose Manuel Barroso, has said it would be extremely difficult, if not impossible, for an independent Scotland to join the EU. His remarks have been dismissed by the SNP as preposterous. And we'll be keeping watch on that because, as I mentioned, that could relate to how the EU shapes around, and eventually we do really expect all the Israelite nations to be dumped out of that. Although I don't know about Brother Reuben, France may stay in there to the last possible minute. Germany may hug up onto him, to use France until at least Germany does as it always has, stabs Germany in the back. That Franco-German alliance always results in tragedy for France, and France never seems to learn the lesson. You cannot embrace the Germans, but even England did make that mistake. Once the Prime Minister of England, back just before World War II started, Prime Minister, his name's on the tip of my tongue, he went to see Hitler and came back and told all of England, oh, peace, don't worry about, England doesn't have to worry about Germany. We just made a peace pact with Germany. We got it made in the shade. And next thing you know, the bombs go blowing off over London, and that peace pact that the Prime Minister came back announcing with Hitler was just a bunch of vain words. Now, Mr. Armstrong told us that before the UN they had the League of Nations, and then the UN, and he said it'll be just the same thing again. Man cannot govern man, and we'll eventually learn that. And here's a story helping to write that lesson next regarding the Syria talks. Lakhdar Brahimi makes an apology for lack of progress. The UN mediator, Lakhdar Brahimi, has apologized to the Syrian people after peace talks in Geneva ended without making progress. He had held final discussions with both sides in Geneva in a last-ditch bid to break the stalemate between the Syrian government and opposition. He said the main sticking point, which you'll hear in this video, was the government which refused again to talk about a transitional governing body. The BBC's Lise Doucette reports.
It's been a week where there was some rare good news. Food and medicine finally went in to the besieged old quarter of Homs. And more than 1,000 people were brought out during a temporary truce between rebel fighters and the government. But resolving Syria's deep humanitarian crisis needs a political solution. That helped push the warring parties to attend peace talks in Geneva. But the second round ended today in complete failure. They couldn't agree on an agenda, nor even a date for the next meeting. The disheartened UN envoy ended the session with a direct message to the Syrian people.
I'm very, very sorry, and I apologize to the Syrian people that their hopes, which were very, very high that something will happen here. I think that the little that has been achieved in Homs gave them even more hope that maybe this is the beginning of the coming out of this horrible crisis they are in.
The Syrian government held the other side responsible for this failure.
At the end, today, the international mediator came to the meeting with a draft agenda. We immediately accepted the draft agenda, while the other side did not.
The Foreign Secretary, William Hague, put the blame elsewhere. The failure to agree an agenda for future talks is a serious setback, he said, and responsibility for that lies squarely with the Assad regime. For millions of Syrians forced to flee their homes into neighbouring countries, the Geneva talks never held out much hope of ending their suffering. Many of these refugees in Jordan saw them as irrelevant.
We can only rely on God and ourselves. Geneva 2 is a farce. None of them have a conscience. No one cares about the Syrian people.
No one had high expectations of these peace talks. Even as they went on, thousands of people were killed here in Syria. For Western governments, it was the only strategy they had to try to end a brutal conflict around the negotiating table. But there's no military solution, as you can hear, in sight either. So the only certainty is that this war looks set to continue, and many fear it will only get worse. Lise Doucette, BBC News, Homs.
Thank you, Lise. And friends, I was telling you earlier, I'm going to leave that slide up for a moment while I don't have video for this story, but I told you a little bit just about the Boko Haram in-village massacre. I have some notes on my smartphone device here that I want to give you a little more detail on that story now. the Boko Haram in village massacre. Suspected Islamist militants excuse me, have raided. Friends, as I tell you about this story, I hope that you can take this to heart and use this to help you pray, thy kingdom come. And friends, I really, really hope, one reason I had a problem putting today's program together is because I'll tell you the truth, I'm actually hurting over some of the things that I've heard in the past few days that brethren have done to other brethren. Now, those of you who watch this program, some of you I know are just, I know from those of you who hit the like button on Facebook, I know you're just people from this country and that country who like to see the way I do local news. Once in a while, though, you hear me really relate it to the Bible, and once in a while you'll hear me talk about brethren in a church that we belong to. And when I hear news, brethren, like this story I'm about to tell you a little more detail about, I hope that those of us who are of the same faith and who've been part of the same church for a long time, who unfortunately there's some inwarring been going on with some brethren and ministers troubling other brethren and ministers, and some fighting to house or corral off flock here or yon, shamefully so. And brethren, if it were left up to me, what I think I might suggest, since even though the pastor general went apostate when he was saying you don't have to tithe, I might say, put it this way, well, that's still God's money, but since there's no real one place with a baton where you can send that money, maybe you could support a local minister who is helpful to you in this way or that way. But overall, since those of you who, maybe some of you watch here also do your services at home now because you don't want to join in with a group under a minister who set up that group, which tends to isolate it from the rest of the body of Christ. And so, and I would concur with your reasoning on that. And perhaps I don't think God's going to fault me. I'm going to ask him to let me know if I'm saying this incorrectly. But what I might suggest you do with that tithe money for a time is to buy plenty of refreshments, set up the room where you hold services at home for those of you doing that, and just with me taking the blame for it if there's any fault. Use that money for right now to make sure that your services at home are outstanding services and that make for a happy, refreshing, edifying Sabbath time, and where you can purchase sets of, there's 20 some odd CDs or DVDs that the man I worked for my first couple of years in the television studio on the Ambassador College campus in Pasadena, Mr. Art Michaud, he took broadcast after broadcast, cleaned them up and put them in an MP3, MP3 format, loaded as many as he could load on a CD, went to the next CD, and now has over 20 CDs, and we're talking hundreds of hours of listening material of Mr. Herbert Armstrong that you can have right there in your home. And that's a wonderful collection to have, and he's not making any profit on them. He does charge his cost. I think it's something like $2 per CD, and some shipping cost. And, his cost for the CD, and he's not really charging his time and effort and work and burning those or having put all that together, but that kind of thing is available, and also it's available all over the internet too. But I'm hurting. I'm hurting from some of the things I have unbelievably heard, and I believe it's true, but it's unbelievable that some ministers and brethren are doing to one another what they're doing. And I hope that kind of thing doesn't cause us to cluster ourselves off and miss what's happening in the world, like this story. I wish I had it in video. If I have it by video tomorrow night, you'll get a double dose of this, and this should really help you. It should help you be able to pray, brethren. Friends, thy kingdom come. Listen to this story. I'm going to read it, but please listen. Suspected Islamist militants have raided a Nigerian village and murdered dozens, according to witnesses. The gunmen reportedly rounded up a group of men in Izghe, is however you pronounce that village, and shot them before going door to door and killing anyone they found. And of course, they did find some with their throats slit, so they didn't just shoot them, they also slit their throats. Officials said they suspected the Boko Haram group was behind the attack. Boko Haram, which claims to be fighting to create an Islamist, I lost my place, hold on a moment. Boko Haram, which is claiming to be fighting to create an Islamic state in northern Nigeria, is notorious for extreme violence and indiscriminate attacks. Bodies in the street. The senator for Borno State, where the attack took place, has told the BBC that 106 people were killed in the latest attack. Ali Doom said around 100 Islamist militants attacked that city for 5 hours on Saturday, on the Sabbath. Well, it would be after the Sabbath, because it says on Saturday evening, without any intervention from the army. He said the military recently withdrew from the area after 9 soldiers were killed in an ambush last week. Just a little more on this, friends. I hope this will help you pray, thy kingdom come. Residents who fled the attack in that city said some of the victims were shot while others had their throats slit. All the dead bodies of the victims are still lying in the streets. Now, friends, like I asked you earlier, how would you like to either be at home and be hidden and not a part of it, or come home later and find that your neighborhood, every one of your neighbors was laying in the street dead with either their throats cut or bullet riddled. That's what happened in this town, and that's what those people saw. Okay, I think that's enough of that for you for tonight. On that story, I will see if there's video becoming available on that by tomorrow night and really make you gut sick with it so you can cry your heart out, thy kingdom come, and mean it from the heart. Friends, this story, I'm going to tell you about another one. No video on this one either, but in the news today is a story about how the President of the United States, Obama, warns Uganda over anti-gay law. Can you believe this? How anti-Bible can a nation that was formed for religious freedom get, with the government trying to dictate anti-religion? President Barack Obama has warned Uganda's president that enacting an anti-gay law will complicate relations with the U.S. Under the proposed legislation of Uganda, they proposed legislation to make it a crime to commit a homosexual act. And under that legislation, those convicted of homosexual acts could face life imprisonment. A good law. Actually, the Bible says take them out and stone them. So that's merciful. That's a merciful law, but that's a God-based type of law. The law would also make it a crime not to report gay people. Promotion of homosexuality, even talking about it without condemning it, will also be punishable by a prison sentence. Well, those who might be listening from Uganda, let me honor your godly law. It is a heinous sin to commit a homosexual act. You can call that hate speech if you want, but I've got Uganda law as a precedent backing me up, and I also, dear friends, have God's Word, the book of law, the book that supersedes any law man makes, backing me up on that fact that homosexuality is perversion. And I'm kind of trying to stress that a little bit. It is outright perversion. A heinous sin that gains one unrepented of the lake of fire and eternal death. And even if we were a godly nation practicing the laws of God, if we were under the government of God, people committing a homosexual act would be taken out and in front of the public, the whole public would stone them to death. And there wouldn't be a case of he who, without homosexual sin, throw the first rock, because he would have already been stoned. There's a little more on this story, if you'll stay with me on this. If you're not, gay people should have their rights. Buck, they should have their rights. Balderdash, that's a bunch of perversion. Let me find where I was, friends. I want to tell you a little bit more on this story. This is a good story. This is a good story. I hope you're not bored with a story like this one. A promotion of homosexuality, even talking about it without condemning it, it is a heinous sin. Would also be punishable by a prison sentence. The private members' bill originally proposed the death penalty. I wish y'all had taken it all the way, friends. For some offenses, such as if a minor were involved. Yeah, definitely. That type of pervert ought to definitely be stoned, hung, or whatever, however you want to give him the death penalty. Or if the perpetrator was HIV positive, but that clause has been dropped. For shame. Uganda has already has legislation banning gay sex between men, but the proposed law sharply tightens restrictions and covers lesbians for the first time. Here's sad news. The U.S. is one of Uganda's largest foreign aid donors. Yeah, so the money, we're going to try to use the money to make them become a nation of sin and perversion. The U.S. is one of Uganda's largest foreign aid donors, and in 2011, a small number of American troops were sent to help the Ugandan military fight the rebel Lord's Resistance Army. But, dear friends, cry your heart out before God, thy kingdom come. This sick nation of the United States and its leaders, but President Obama, who once referred to the proposed law as odious, the law banning gay practices, homosexual, perverse, sinful practices, says this relationship will become more complicated if that law banning anti-gay activity is approved, with Obama describing it as an affront and as a danger to Uganda's gay community. Well, yeah, it ought to be a danger to a perverted gay community. They all ought to be wiped off the face of this earth, stoned, dead. America's National Security Advisor Susan Rice said on Twitter that she spoke at length with the Ugandan President Museveni on Saturday night to urge him not to sign the bill. Shame on you, Susan Rice! Shame on you! And shame on you too, President Obama! President Obama's statement didn't limit criticism to Uganda, noting an increase in reports of violence and harassment of homosexuals from Russia to Nigeria. Again, they ought to be put to death! They ought to be stoned! That is what God's Word says, friends. This makes my blood boil. A month ago, President Museveni refused to approve the controversial bill. His spokesman said that the president of Uganda believed that gay people are sick. Right, he is about that. They are sick. But that he did not believe they should be killed or jailed for life. Well, I agree they shouldn't be jailed for life, but I don't disagree. I do disagree. They should be killed. That is what the Bible says. What the president has been saying is that we shall not persecute these homosexuals and lesbians. That is the point, said Tamale Marudi. Mr. Museveni has been trying to reach a compromise with MPs, members of Parliament, because if he refuses to sign the bill, Parliament can still force it through with a 2/3 vote. Terrific. Members of Parliament in Uganda, go ahead, even without your president. Give it at least a 2/3 vote and get that bill through, making it a crime to do gay activity, because it is a crime according to God's word, which is law in the supreme, and it's the law of love. Homosexuality is perverse. I'm going to try to get this map for you for tomorrow. No, you can't see this little screen that shows how in Africa there are a good number of states that have made homosexuality a crime in Africa. Thumbs up for you guys. And here's a comment I want to read to you in closing on this story. In a letter written to the parliamentary speaker when he blocked the bill in January, the president of Uganda disputed the view that homosexuality was an alternative sexual orientation, reasoning you cannot call an abnormality an alternative orientation. Good for you, Mr. President of Uganda. You said it well there, sir. It could be that the Western societies, on account of random breeding, have generated many abnormal people. Right arm, right on. All right, friends, I'm at nearly 1 hour point. I got a little more news I want to share with you in video. This relates to, let's put our shield sign back up just for a moment. This relates to the second seal of Revelation, war and rumors of war. In these stories, it also relates just a little bit to the fourth seal, under the term Jesus Christ used that Mark recorded in Mark 13, verse 8, terake, troubled waters, mobs and seditions, and that kind of thing. Pro and anti-Maduro marchers gather thousands in Venezuela.
Anti-government protesters defiantly took to the streets of Caracas on Saturday. They asked for the release of students arrested in the past 2 weeks, as well as for increased security and a change in the economy. They said their protests were peaceful.
They are firing rubber bullets. They are firing a lot of tear gas. We are peaceful. We do not have weapons.
Earlier this week, 3 people died as anti-government marches turned violent. The government has blamed the hardline opposition for trying to stage a coup. On Saturday, the president joined supporters in the streets, assuring them he would not step down. He said he would continue being in power because Venezuelan people are backing him. He also said a manhunt is underway for Leopoldo Lopez, an opposition leader the government blames for this week's demonstrations. The day ended with more violence and injuries, as police fired tear gas to break up protests in the east of the city. More marches are expected to take place on Sunday. For now, protesters are not letting go either. Irene Caselli, BBC News, Caracas.
Thank you, Irene Caselli. And you heard her friend say that 3 people had died in that. So there you got that fourth seal with its writer named Death active there, and also here in Kiev. Although right now there's a little bit of a relaxation of things in Kiev. I don't think it's all over, though, yet. In this story, Ukraine protesters vacate City Hall in Kiev with a promise of amnesty on the books.
After more than 2 months' occupation, protesters vacated Kiev's City Hall, a symbol of their anti-government movement. They had established a revolutionary headquarters there, and at one point fought off riot police who tried to evict them. But in the end, they left peacefully, and even tidied up a bit. Some protesters criticized the decision, however.
We're leaving in a bad mood. This place has become a second home to us. I don't even remember the last time I was at my real home. I see what's going on here as an attempt to stop the revolution.
It was all part of a deal with the government. Ukraine's prosecutor general said in return a general amnesty would go into effect on Monday. But the protest movement continues to occupy a barricaded camp in the center of Kiev.
You have been watching Nightcast with Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth. Nightcast can be seen Sunday through Thursday nights here on cogtv.org. Tonight's program is also available anytime on demand in the cogtv.org video archive.